Hey guys, welcome back to our Bible study. In this video, we'll be looking at John 2:13 to 25. If you missed our previous studies, please check out the Bible study playlist on the channel, linked above. And if you have a Bible, let's turn to John 2:13. It was nearly time for the Jewish Passover celebration, so Jesus went to Jerusalem. In the temple area, he saw merchants selling cattle, sheep, and doves for sacrifices. He also saw dealers at tables exchanging foreign money. Jesus made a whip from some ropes and chased them all out of the temple. He drove out the sheep and cattle, scattered the money changers' coins over the floor, and turned over their tables. Then, going over to the people who sold doves, he told them, "Get these things out of here. Stop turning my Father's house into a marketplace." Then his disciples remembered this prophecy from the scriptures. "Passion for God's house will consume me." But the Jewish leaders demanded, "What are you doing? If God gave you authority to do this, show us a miraculous sign to prove it." "All right," Jesus replied. "Destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up." "What?" they exclaimed. "It has taken 46 years to build this temple, and you can rebuild it in 3 days?" But when Jesus said this temple, he meant his own body. After he was raised from the dead, his disciples remembered he had said this, and they believed both the scriptures and what Jesus had said. Because of the miraculous sign Jesus did in Jerusalem at the Passover celebration, many began to trust in him. But Jesus didn't trust them because he knew all about people. No one needed to tell him about human nature, for he knew what was in each person's heart. Capernaum became Jesus' home base during his ministry in Galilee. Located on a major trade route, it was an important city in the region with a Roman garrison and a customs station. At Capernaum, Matthew was called to be a disciple. The city was also the home of several other disciples and a high-ranking government official. It had at least one major synagogue. Although Jesus made this city his base of operations in Galilee, he condemned it for the people's unbelief. In verse 13, the Passover celebration took place yearly at the temple in Jerusalem. Every Jewish male was expected to make a pilgrimage to Jerusalem during this time. This was a week-long festival. The Passover was one day, and the Festival of Unleavened Bread lasted the rest of the week. The entire week commemorated the freeing of Jews from slavery in Egypt. Jerusalem was both the religious and political seat of Palestine and the place where the Messiah was expected to arrive. The temple was located there, and many Jewish families from all over the world would travel to Jerusalem during the key festivals. The temple was on an imposing site, a hill overlooking the city. Solomon had built the first temple on this site almost 1,000 years earlier, but his temple had been destroyed by the Babylonians. The temple was rebuilt in 515 BC, and Herod the Great had enlarged and remodeled it. The temple area was always crowded during Passover with thousands of out-of-town visitors. The religious leaders crowded it even further by allowing money changers and merchants to set up booths in the court of the Gentiles. They rationalized this practice as a convenience for the worshippers and as a way to make money for temple upkeep. But the religious leaders did not seem to care that the court of the Gentiles was so full of merchants that foreigners found it difficult to worship. And worship was the main purpose for visiting the temple. No wonder Jesus was angry. In verse 14, the temple tax had to be paid in local currency, so foreigners had to have their money changed. But the money changers often charged very high exchange rates. The people also were required to make sacrifices for sins. Because of the long journey, many could not bring their own animals. Some who brought animals had them rejected for imperfections. So merchants conducted a flourishing business in the temple courtyard. The price of sacrificial animals was much higher in the temple area than anywhere else. And Jesus was angry at the dishonest, greedy practices of the money changers and merchants. And he disliked their presence on the temple grounds. They were making a mockery of God's house of worship. John records this first clearing or cleansing of the temple. A second clearing occurred at the end of Jesus' ministry about 3 years later, and that event is recorded in Matthew. God's temple was being misused by people who had turned it into a marketplace. They had forgotten or didn't care that God's house is a place of worship, not a place for making a profit. our attitude toward the church is wrong if we see it as a place for personal contacts or business advantage, make sure you attend church to worship God. Jesus was obviously angry at the merchants who exploited those who had come to God's house to worship. There's a difference between uncontrolled rage and righteous indignation. Yet both are called anger. We must be very careful how we use the powerful emotion of anger. It is right to be angry about injustice and sin. It is wrong to be angry over trivial personal offenses. Jesus made a whip and chased out the money changers. Does this example permit us to use violence against wrongdoers? Certain authority is granted to some, but not to all. For example, the authority to use weapons and restrain people is granted to police officers, but not to the general public. The authority to imprison people is granted to judges, but not to individual citizens. Jesus had God's authority, something we cannot have. While we want to live like Christ, we should never try to claim his authority where it has not been given to us. In verse 17, Jesus took the evil acts in the temple as an insult against God, and thus he did not deal with them half-heartedly. He was consumed with righteous anger against such flagrant disrespect for God. The Jews understood Jesus to mean the temple out of which he had just driven the merchants and money changers. This was the temple Zerubbabel had built over 500 years earlier, but Herod the Great had begun remodeling it, making it much larger and far more beautiful. It had been 46 years since this remodeling had started, and it still wasn't completely finished. They understood Jesus' words to mean that this imposing building could be torn down and rebuilt in 3 days, and they were startled. Jesus was not talking about the temple made of stones, but about his body. His listeners didn't realize it, but Jesus was greater than the temple. His words would take on meaning for his disciples after his resurrection. That Christ so perfectly fulfilled this prediction became the strongest proof for his claims to be God. The Son of God knows all about human nature. Jesus was well aware of the truth of Jeremiah 17:9, which states, "The human heart is the most deceitful of all things and desperately wicked. Who really knows how bad it is?" Jesus was discerning that he knew that the faith of some of the followers was superficial. Some of the same people claiming to believe in Jesus at this time would later yell, "Crucify him." It's easy to believe when it is exciting and everyone else believes the same way. But keep your faith firm even when it isn't popular to follow Christ. Alright, so that concludes our study of John 2:13-25. If you have anything to add or have any questions, please comment below. And if you liked the video, give it a thumbs up and subscribe and hit the bell so you can be notified when we post a new video. I love you all. Peace.